special board meeting of Thursday, January 7th, 2010, to order. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, and I believe we do have Spanish translation here tonight.
Yes, we have Yahtzee Ponce with us tonight.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Yahtzee Ponce y seré su intérprete para esta reunión. Si necesitan de mi servicio, por favor de localizarme atrás del salón. Gracias.
Gracias. Okay, and we also have headsets for the hearing impaired if anybody should need those. At this time, we'll take public comments. Are there any public comments?
I don't believe we have
Seeing
any
none,
speaker slips.
we will move on to our action agenda item E1, discussion and possible approval of memorandum of understanding to participate in Race to the Top for the elementary and secondary districts. Thank you. Dr. Sarvis?
Well, I'd like to make a rather brief presentation on this, and it really depends on whether you've had a chance to go over the materials, and I can go over the materials in detail. I've tried to include everything that we have at this point in time. The whole process is still a process. We're being asked to sign an MOU now in advance of the state application going into the feds. The state would not know whether they won the Race to the Top funding from the federal government until April. If they win the funding, then they will take those districts that have signed an MOU and that have agreed in advance to abide by all the procedures and requirements of Race to the Top, even though some of them will not be known until the state evaluation, the state application goes into the feds. And at that point in time, then we would have a 90-day window to develop the rest of the plan. So this is really a consideration of the first part of the plan, and that first part of the plan is found in section 1. Let me just say, going into this, that the first part of the plan is really found in section 3. The section 1 contains everything we had from the state Race to the Top website up until yesterday. So it was current as of yesterday. And as part of the first section, you see various questions and answers. These are from telephone conferences, and I sat in on those conferences. Some of these questions were my questions, and they got gathered up as part of the Q's and A's from those teleconferences. I think there are a number of them that are critical to this, but I think that's only by way of explanation as to what the actual MOU would call for. The second section is, again, everything up to date from CSBA from January 6th. So this is what CSBA was saying as of January 6th. CSBA also included, also included in this is a list of the districts that had sent in advance a letter of intent. One of the questions and answers that we all determined early on was that you did not have to submit a letter of intent in order to apply and sign an MOU. So while there are 800 districts on this list, and that constitutes 65% of the districts in California, the number of districts that are likely to apply is probably more like 70% or higher. In general, most of the large districts have applied or are signaling an intent to apply. There are a number of smaller districts that are not. Around our immediate area, none of the other feeder elementary districts to our secondary district is on this list. Carpinteria is on this list, but in fact, it's interesting in terms of those that are basic aid and those that aren't, and generally there's a lack of those that are basic aid. But then generally, those that are basic aid are not closer on Title I, and 50% of the federal funding would go toward Title I, Title I schools, they say, and then 50% would be distributed in a more equitable fashion. In today's teleconference, the wording on that was that, well, we have a vague plan to equitably distribute that money. The outgrowth of that, though, is that the funding is not known. And this is another reluctance on my part to put this in front of you, because I cannot tell you whether this will bring us $30,000 each year over the next 4 years, excuse me, not 40, but 4 years, for a total of $120,000, whether it will bring substantially more, like $60 per student annually over the next 4 years for double that amount. I just don't know. It will depend on the actual number of districts here. It will depend on the actual funding that the state of California could get. You know, the state is competing for $700 million, but in actuality, it's a range. They have been signaled by the feds that this is actually a range of $350 million to $750 million. So that money may be cut in half on the part of the state. Then in Section 3 is what we had originally from the Department of Education, the Board of Education, and the Secretary of Education. This is rather unusual that we'd get a document from all three. It's what came in the middle of December, and frankly, I expected an update on this. I expected to get updated information, and by now to give you something a little bit different. It has not changed. And I went to the website again just last night. The document that you have, which is the MOU with the attachments, are now shown in a little bit of a different fashion, but it's only by way of numbering as to what's section attachment 1 and attachment 2. And the numbering sequence is a little different, but all of the words are the same. I think what's important in this is, well, just a number of things. Let me just highlight, both by way of discomfort and by way of what generally this program is about. We would turn in an MOU for each of the districts. If you were to approve this today, we'd turn in one for the elementary and one for the secondary district. That this would not be the final scope of work, that we would be turning in essentially the first part of the MOU, and then if the state were to receive the Race to the Top funding, we would develop the second part of the MOU. I believed that it would be important to have the union's words on this as well, and I was emailing Lane Monday morning about this, and I thought he was uncharacteristically quiet about it. I discovered after I had emailed him this morning and didn't hear anything, I discovered just hours ago that he didn't know we had a meeting this afternoon. And he said, based on the email from Monday morning, that he was planning to meet with his executive council this afternoon to determine whether they would sign an MOU. And he's already spoken to a couple of you, I understand, and I apologize profusely that he did not know. We will make sure that the email goes out as soon as the agenda goes out in the future. But he said it was unlikely that the association would sign an MOU, and there were a number of reasons for that, and I think I can represent those reasons, or you can, as we go through a discussion of the document. Essentially, he feels that there are already a number of things in place, that the district's moving ahead, that we have reconstituted and reconfigured schools, that they're making good progress, that he feels the contractual elements are already appropriate. I know that's fairly brief on my part, but I'm sorry that it's really my fault that his voice is not here today and that he didn't have the heads up on this. other elements that you see in this document, oh, I know, I wanted to comment. The signature of local teachers union leader is not a required signature. The state would like to know if the association is not going to sign it or will not sign it. Of course, they would like the association to sign it because they think, this is on page 5, they think that it makes it a stronger application on the part of the state in going to the feds to say there are a lot of LEAs in this state that want to participate. There's broad support of our unions, and it looks like they're not getting that broad support. Going on in this, you see in the exhibit that's attached to this, you see a number of the required elements, and all of those elements are marked as yes, yes, yes. Let's see, let me go by your numbering system here. It would start.
Was that in section 2, Brian?
Yes, it would start Exhibit 1, page 1 of 15. And I assume you may have notes on some of these. I do have the new format. It's actually 1 of 16 in the new format, but the wordings are identical. The page formats are identical. I think these elements are critical, and most of them are simply drawn out of the federal bill. There are 4 major areas: standards and assessment, the data systems to support instruction, and by talking about use of technology here, they really are talking about data systems, and you'll see that in the definitions toward the end. Great teachers and leaders, and this is the one that has gotten the most press because it calls for an evaluation of teachers and principals that is based on the use of multiple measures that include student growth as a significant factor. That's for both teachers and for principals. It's to be done on a yearly basis. It doesn't have to be the same evaluation each year. It could look a little bit different each year, but that's not what our contract calls for currently. So that would be an item that I told Lane would be a negotiated item. There are a couple of items in this on page 3 of 15 at the top of the page. The use, it's 4B, that very first line. Use evaluations to inform decisions on compensation, promotion, and retention of teachers and principals, including by providing opportunities for highly effective teachers and principals to obtain additional compensation and be given additional responsibilities. This is a biggie. This is something quite different from what we do right now, and to my mind, this would require negotiation, although that negotiation period, as I understand it, would not start until April, when we got word that the state's application had been won and that the grant money would be awarded. The next section down, 4C, yes, go ahead.
The legislation that just passed, the Romero,
Yes.
does it basically remove obstacles to doing this, or does it require some of this?
That's an interesting one. In fact, we talked about that in this morning's teleconference. And in some of the elements, just as an example, the provision of students leaving low-performing schools and being able to attend other schools that are high-performing schools, whether or not those are in the LEA in the district or in another district, is a provision that will stand whether the state gets this funding or not. So some of the things that the state is putting in place through legislation are things that are structural changes that will stand anyway. In other cases, They were really intended to show the feds that the state of California was serious about race to the top and about making these kinds of changes, and they were done so that they could enable these changes. However, they don't supersede any of these processes. For example, it's very clear that none of these would supersede a collective bargaining agreement or the requirement to negotiate. So we still have in place those requirements to negotiate with our professional associations.
What I'm asking is, on the issue, for example, of the use of evaluation data,
Yes.
growth data in teacher evaluations.
Yes.
Okay, is that required, or is the former rule against it simply removed?
Well, that would be required here. And the district would then have to negotiate that into the contract. Yes.
I see. Thank you.
I want to be really clear on that it's, the new bills that passed simply, I mean, it's required in the MOU, but the bills that
Yes.
passed simply remove
That's-
the
that was
the
my
impediment. So they say, if that's agreed upon in negotiations at your local district level, essentially.
Yes.
So it doesn't say you must, because, and so of course it makes it that much harder if it's not a state law, but that is what was put in place.
Okay, thank you.
The next section down, that 4C, that says use evaluations to inform decisions on tenure and/or certification of teachers and principals using rigorous standards and streamlined, transparent, and fair procedures, is another area that would require some negotiation, to my mind. The fourth area is found on the next page, and that's turning around the lowest achieving schools. And there's much made in this legislation about the lowest achieving schools, and the state is talking about the lowest schools as essentially being the lowest 5% of the schools. State rank. Yes, on some sort of a state ranking. It has not been defined. There will not be a list until next week. We expect Cesar Chavez may be on that list. We do not expect that other schools in our district would be on that list. It's simply, but the statement was made this morning, interestingly enough, well, what about charter schools? If they're the bottom 5% charter schools, then the district doesn't really have the authority to go in and restructure that school. And the answer from the California Department of Education was the bottom 5% of charter schools would simply be shut down. That's it. So it was a very clear answer, and it pertains to a former conversation that we had. The definitions, I think, are also very important, because when it talks about what an effective principal is, what an effective teacher is, and that's found on page 6, it's very much linked to the growth made by students on achievement tests, growth being defined, for example, as 1 grade level in an academic year. And when they talk later about highly effective principals and highly effective teachers, then they're talking about 1.5 grade levels growth per year. So most of the real guts of this in terms of definition come in through the defining of these terms about what a highly effective teacher is, what a highly effective principal is, what high needs students are, what high poverty schools are, what they really mean by instructional improvement systems that are really all about data and the use of data so that we can track the progress of schools. Let me go back to funding for just a moment. As I said before, we do not know what funding would be attached to this. And the state won't know. They won't be able to tell us for quite some time, and it would, of course, be contingent upon what funding the state achieved. So that wouldn't happen until later this spring. We do know that we have significant Title I numbers in our district, and if half of the funding goes toward those schools or those districts based on their Title I count, then that would be a significant amount in our district. The other 50% would be distributed on some vague plan of equity across all districts or all schools, and that would be regardless of whether they're Title I or other variables. I mean, they have some sense of, well, all schools need to get this money if they want to participate in this. The other part of funding I would like to emphasize is that this is one-time money. It would come to us over a 4-year period. It would end. If we, for example, were to be able to put in some sort of compensation, incentive compensation for student improvement, we would not have ongoing funding to sustain that into the future, and we just need to be aware of that. And finally, let me talk about exit strategies, because we could, at this point, enter an MOU, and if we were unable to negotiate any of the required elements, we could exit, and we could simply tell them that we haven't been able to achieve what would be necessary to satisfy the requirements of this, so we're not going to participate. And I think that's it. I mean, I can go in further detail on any of these.
Mrs. Parker?
Well, I would like to start, first of all, by reading an email from Lane Wheeler, the president of the SBTA.
Very
I don't
good.
know that all of us have had a chance to see this. And he feels so strongly about this issue that I do want it read into the record. And it says, due to the late notice regarding the Race to the Top meeting and the fact that the SBTA found out about the meeting today from an email from Dr. Sarvis and a 3 p.m. notice in the SBSD e-news, SBTA will not have a representative at this meeting. We do, however, want the school board members to know that SBTA has no intention of signing an MOU regarding Race to the Top, as this program would create chaos in our school district and drain resources from local classrooms, as well as punish lower performing schools without providing needed assistance. Please do not enter this short-sighted, one-time, and extremely limited program. Thank you for your efforts. Sincerely, Lane Wheeler, president of the SBTA.
Can we get a copy of that?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and if not, then I will, we'll
Okay,
be sure to
would you
get it
please?
printed out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I did want to share that. In terms of my own feelings about it, in looking through particularly this exhibit and the frequently asked questions, I was actually struck by how much of it ties into things that I think would be really positive for this district. I was really, in almost, and I would say 90% of the areas, I think it's a really positive program that what I like about it is that if you're working, if it's a statewide collaboration, there are certain things that would be happening at the state level that would really assist us in things that we've talked about doing locally. I really like that it would be this group of districts that would have the first opportunity to move to a growth model in terms of AYP. I think that would be really important, putting the money aside. My 2 areas that I have some concerns about are both in the same sort of subheading, and that was under the Great Teachers and Leaders subheading. And that is about 2 things. One is, what does that look like, using student growth as a significant factor in an area designed with teacher and principal involvement? What makes me feel better about it is that if the state is coming forward with a model, as they say that they would, working with the CTA and then taking it to the local level between us and the SBTA, that it would be, if we went forward with it, it would need to be something that had a lot of input from teachers, because there are so many teachers that don't fall under the category, first of all, of even having their students tested under the CST. It could not be simply a CST model in any way, the California Standards Test. And so I think that would need a lot of thought and a lot of work. So that's something I'm a little concerned about. The other is the idea of annual evaluations of teachers in particular, because we don't have the manpower. We don't have enough administrators to do that effectively for every single one of their teachers every year. And I know that the money that we're talking about, to me, it's not really about the money, but the money should be coming to simply support these structural changes. So what does that look like? You know, would there be enough money coming in to support administrative assistance or compensation to teachers if it's going to be a peer review process? You know, how do we move forward with that, especially considering that this is only money for 4 years? What sort of a transition would it be if we put it in place and then we had to bump out of it again? In terms of additional compensation for these highly effective teachers and principals, I personally am not interested in that on a teacher-by-teacher basis, but if it is, it seems to be indicated that we could come up with a plan that is not necessarily based on that, that it could be like a school-wide plan where you're working together as a team and you show student growth. If you could do it that way, I think that's something that would be very interesting and very positive for our community. So that's where I am on this one.
On that last point, no one has asked that question, and I didn't think to ask that question. I don't know. I frankly don't know. Yes.
Sorry, Ms. Deacon?
Well, this is an area that concerns me as well. I mean, we've got 3 teachers sitting up here, and I know personally that merit pay is something that, on the individual basis, I don't really support, because I think teachers work as a team, and teachers in the 6th grade depend on teachers on the kindergarten through the 5th grade to deliver students to them that are well prepared. But I am intrigued by the idea of awards possibly at the school site level that might comply. And as I read the frequently asked questions piece of that, where it talks about pay for performance, it says the LEA will ultimately need to determine how to design their local system to meet this requirement. It doesn't say specifically that it's money to individual teachers. I don't know if we have that latitude or not. But just some of my other thoughts are similarly not necessarily all about the money, although certainly I think our community might expect us to get in line for this money and would like to see us work with our teachers to this end. But I do think there are some intangible benefits as well along the lines of models that are being created at the state level that we could have access to. I mean, I don't want the train to leave the station without us. I think being in on it early might also make additional money that might come available more likely to come to those districts that signed on early. I like the discussion about the partnerships on STEM education. We could build on what we're already doing, and getting in early on the efforts to improve the statewide data system and how that interlocks with the local data that we're collecting. I just see a lot of things happening that we want to be in on anyway, and so I would hate for us to step away from the table on that. Clearly, we need to work with the teachers on it. I want to get them on board, and I think we need to find a way to work with them to do that.
Could I respond to that as well? I had gone through and I'd marked a number of the areas that I thought were entirely consistent with our board focus goals, with the kinds of things that we've been working on and are intending to be working on, and I was surprised. I mean, it really did look directionally like it was where we were going anyway. The other part that you just commented on about what the state is doing, it's my sense that if the state does get this funding, that they will be off in this direction anyway, and they'll be pulling districts in that direction anyway. And whether you're a participant or not, well, just for example, you know, this identifying standards, you know, the intention at the federal level is to get a bunch of states together and start moving toward national standards, and then let a state embellish those standards and say, well, we still think that we want higher standards than that, so we will adopt those standards plus these other standards. If the state of California does that, you know darn well we'll want to be in on that, and if they redesign their testing system to meet those new standards that are sort of common initial national standards plus the embellished state standards, we're all going to be using that test. So there are some things that are directionally are going to be done by the state, or that would be done by the state anyway, that we would want to be a part of. I do agree.
I'm going to ask a question on that point. I want to make sure I'm clear on your response. So are you saying that if the state were to move in this direction, that it wouldn't matter if we hadn't been in on this sort of ground floor step in order to move ahead with them? Or are you saying that it would be better for us to have been?
What I'm saying is that there will be certain things that all districts will be doing anyway. There will be other things that some of the districts won't be doing because they have not entered into the MOU, or they haven't come in the second round, because there's still a possibility of districts coming in a second round beyond this. And then there won't be the funding attached to it for other districts. So they'll be participating in something that's a little new, like revised state standards, like revised state tests, and here they'll be perhaps one of the other feeder districts in our area that haven't shown any interest in this MOU and Race to the Top, but will still actually be recipients of that. I mean, I believe that would be a positive thing as well.
There was another question that came up in the document from CSBA. One of their statements says, funding is one time only and may not fully fund the activities required under the MOU.
Yes.
To me, that sounds like additional costs.
Yes.
So is there potential that we would have costs that would exceed the amount of funding that we would actually receive?
Yes, there is that potential.
That-
And in that case, I would think that we would identify that and we would exit. Or we would say, we were going to do this anyway, we will fund that because we believe in it, and we'll take the rest of the MOU money to do the other things. I mean, I think there's some point where we can make a decision. In fact, you saw under discussion about exit strategies, you could really bow out early on. You could bow out at somewhere along the line if you had been participating in good faith and trying to deliver those things. Although in the end, if they find districts simply took the money and just didn't do anything, you might even have to pay the money back. So, the funding part of this is not so clear. Yes.
Ms. Deacon?
I also had that question, because obviously we don't want to sign up for something that causes an outflow of money, right? Although in the memo from Jack O'Connell's office, it says, it is our intent that any costs associated with implementation should be funded with Race to the Top funding, other federal funding, or any other discretionary funding source an LEA chooses to utilize in these efforts. So I guess we could pick and choose, the extent to which we wanted to participate and only spend Race to the Top money on things that were required.
Dr. Noel?
I stand back and I see this as a sea change, and I think it's coming. I think it's that in some sense, if you want to be where history's going, you're with this. It's a chance, and I look at it as basically looking at an effort to change a whole educational culture. And there will be a lot of little things in there that are going to be difficult, and some big things are going to be difficult. It tackles the most controversial issues, at least in my 10 years in public education, about pay and about evaluation. It's about 10 years late from when we were reading the Sanders work in Tennessee, isn't it?
Yes,
The value-added work. The idea's been around a long time. You hear it, you read it in the literature, you hear it when you go onto a PI campus, and they say, we've improved and we don't get recognized for it. You know, and the growth model finally is arriving. To me, that gives you a basis for a fair system of recognizing merit, of evaluating teachers and looking at contributions. Because let's just say, we don't hold someone accountable, a principal or a teacher, against something like a threshold, but it's where do they start? The kids who come into your class, here's where they are, where do they leave? Was there some value added in that experience? And now, how do you reward that? And that's another issue, and here I just draw on my experience in the University of California, where we have a basic pay system and periodic cost of living increases. Everybody goes up with the cost of living, but according to merit, you get the increment. So, and it's what we call them step increases, which are based on merit. And so you have a form of merit, of rewarding merit, but it's not punitive to the people who don't win it. They continue to be paid and to have their salaries increase. So I see this as kind of consistent with a long-term change in public education to kind of, well, no, I won't say that part. I see it as part of a major change, and you know, it's part of the excitement, in my opinion, about our new president and about the value system that he's bringing to the table, and the efforts. Boy, it's kind of cliche to say it, but it's an effort to change the world.
Others? Well, I think I'm in the minority. I have some real concerns about this. One is that I feel like I guess my major concern is that I feel like it circumvents, or would appear to circumvent some serious discussions that that I think we would need to have philosophically as a board. Merit pay, for one. The issue of using student achievement as a basis for teacher evaluation, and even, I find it less of concern, but it still raises a philosophical issue of whether it would be used as the principal evaluation as well. I think some of the issues that are mandatory in this it feels like almost like a backdoor way of instituting some policies that, if we were to institute them through our normal board policy process, would be highly controversial. And so I feel like if we go forward with this, we are likely to still encounter that controversy with SBTA, for example. But it would appear as though the board had already made a decision on those topics before we even entered negotiation, which to me borders on bad faith. And that gives me real pause. On the other hand, I hear precisely what Dr. Noel is saying. I do think this seems like the direction we're headed. So I'm somewhat caught in a bind there. But I really have reservations about how we go forward with this and still maintain our negotiation and sort of professionality with our bargaining units, since so much of it is dependent on reaching agreement with them. In addition, even in the language that's used here, it says, I'm looking for the one, that LEAs, it is a significant commitment of the entire LEA and should be entered into only with the full consent and approval of the entire governance team. A special meeting could provide an opportunity for input from community members, unions, and other stakeholders, and an opportunity to secure additional signatures of support. I feel like and, going ahead with this without having any of that discussion is problematic for me. At the same time, as I said, I'm really caught in a bind because I don't want us to miss the opportunity. But I also don't want us to create so much ill will. As we all know, these things take on a life of their own. We can say what our intent is as much as we want, but it's often perceived quite differently. And that people operate on perceptions rather than reality often, so.
I was pleased that you brought Lane's words directly into the meeting, and I tried to paraphrase those as well. And I pretty much knew that the direction of CTA was that we won't be signing these agreements. And it's been interesting to hear from some of the other districts about associations that are willing to sign the agreements. I did remind Lane when I spoke with him earlier today that in our initial position for negotiations, we said specifically that we will negotiate so that we can compete for Race to the Top monies. And at the point that I realize I'm arguing for in this case, at the point that we would be sitting down at the table, which would be probably May, June, July, we would probably know what funding was attached to this. We would be much closer on some of the details because we would have seen what the state application calls for, and we would have seen what the demands are on the part of the feds. So I think we'd be a little bit closer, but you're exactly right. This commits us up front to this course of trying to negotiate toward not only the use of test scores as a major part of that evaluation system, which is biggie, and as well as merit pay, some sort of a compensation based result.
Well, I have a question. I don't know if anybody, I don't know if you know the answer to this or if somebody else would need to know but is there any evidence, any research that shows that using student performance or student growth as an evaluation model actually results in the retention or recruitment or enhancement of teaching?
In evaluation, I do not know. That's something that
That Sanders research,
Sanders
incidentally,
research,
it's still being
Tennessee.
cited.
is it.
Which surprised me. This was a study done, Tennessee adopted the growth model about a decade ago.
Called it value added.
Pardon me?
They called it value added.
Value added, yeah. And the couple of pieces that were published were really interesting. Not so much directly to your point, Mrs. Cordero, but one that sticks in my mind was that had to do with if a student who gets an ineffective teacher, they say in third grade, they could trace that through because they're following that student now. And they could say, okay, but if the student if that's followed up by an effective teacher subsequently, it takes about 2-3 years to run through that effect. 2 years of an ineffective teacher never recovered. And I just, my God, that was just a little finding. Now, it's not addressing your point, except in the negative sense that you certainly would not want to, if you know who those teachers are, you certainly want to move kids around and try to help those teachers. But the positive thing is I haven't seen any major studies that say this in a macro sense helps. I imagine that the research happens at a more decomposed level, looking at specific aspects of it, but that's something we should be looking at.
And then what the other question that I had is how much of, if we were to account for the time of the staff that it would take to prepare and develop this program, this proposal, how much would you estimate the value of that to be?
I don't know. I just know we're understaffed to be able to deliver and
I guess
provide the support for
The
it.
bottom line of my question is, are we going to spend more than we get in trying to prepare for it?
I would think most of the answer would be based on what kind of help we can all get from the state and what kind of measures the state can put in place. The state talks about formative measures here that are in part developed by the state. Well, if, you know, that's been a major complaint on our part about STAR testing all along. Well, here all these districts are left on their own to do these formative assessments, and my gosh, if we could do this in a central way and all be very consistent and have them at the same level of rigor as our state tests, then we'd all be more successful.
And in a timely way,
And in a
the
timely way.
results don't come in
Yes.
to the same teacher.
Yes, but that was really never funded by the state, and of course I wonder whether any of this money is going to really hit at that point and get those things accomplished by the state, or whether the state's going to again be in the position of saying, boy, that's a really good idea, but you know, for now we don't have the money to do that, so sorry districts, you'll be left on your own. I did have one other thought on the question that you just asked. I put something in the board brief. It was a study done by a researcher who had looked at value-added models. And if you'll recall, his conclusion was that they don't work, or they usually don't work simply because students are not randomly assigned to classrooms. I mean, there's a lot of selectivity in which students go into which classes, and that would have to be something that we would address. I mean, I think that's a critical element, rather than decide which classes students go into. And you know, here we have parental choice that feeds heavily into that, and we'll have schools who will say, well, gosh, if you have a preference for a teacher, parents, please let us know. You may not get that preference. Let us know your top 2 picks, your top 3 picks, and we'll try to give you that preference. Well, that all weighs heavily into which students go into the classes and the potential for success as well. And that would become a major issue for us as well.
Can I ask him a question?
Dr. Noel?
But the state is moving towards growth modeling anyway, right?
Well, they would
With
like
this whole
to.
new system coming in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
right,
they-
right.
yes,
Okay. So whether we're in this or not, the state's going that way.
yes.
Okay. And the standards are going to be aligned with whatever, with this whole movement, right? New standards or, what I'm trying to say is that if the decision-making, something you said earlier, basically the same thing, if the decision-making at the state level is guided by this new philosophy, then all the decisions, all the things that come down to us, the standards, the testing, and it occurs to me also, the textbooks.
Yeah, the instructional materials,
Yeah,
definitely.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's just, and if 70% of the schools are gonna do this, that's gonna be a pretty strong current to run against. And it's gonna be it will be part of the culture, it'll be part of the conversation. And the changeover, I assume, will be a statewide a national conversation with, including the moans and the groans and, you know, all of the problems. I would assume this will become one of the central things that we all think and talk about for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
Okay, that was all by way of a question. Thank you.
Oh. I thought it was a
Mrs.
good
Deacon?
comment.
Well, I wanted to respond to something Mrs. Cordero said earlier, too, because I agree that while the intent of a lot of what's in here, I think, is really valuable, this is a pretty blunt instrument, and it's heavy on the stick and light on the carrot, since we don't even know how much money we may get. But on the other hand, because we anticipate that so many districts in the state will probably sign on to this, and that their bargaining units will all be talking about this, that there may be discussion among CTA and the unions across districts about acceptable ways to find agreement with the districts. I mean, maybe that's overly optimistic, but I would like to see the teachers feel that they would really benefit from this, and it would not be, we're not taking something away from them, but giving them the opportunity to provide more financial support to them across the board.
Mrs. Parker?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. for me, in looking through all the things, all these elements of the state reform plan, in terms of the teacher compensation, I really feel like with the SBTA that may not be so controversial depending on what we come up with, because the additional compensation for highly effective teachers, because when the Academic Performance Index was first implemented, there were school-wide bonuses given. And there were not, I don't recall there being a lot of protests about that at the time. And there were teachers that benefited in the early years back in the day when there was money, long, long ago. So I really feel like that would be something that we could craft that would be acceptable and positive. To me, I really think it's going to come down to the student growth measures in terms of evaluation. But even within that, there are 100 different ways that could look. And I would hope that our teachers would see this as let's talk about this. What do you think could work? What can we work together and come up with a plan? It shouldn't be, as you put it, a blunt instrument. I hope that this is just a first step, and that they see it as just a first step and not a hammer coming down saying this is the direction that we're going in, because I can, even just sitting here thinking about it, I can think of lots of ways where it would be palatable.
And even beneficial.
And definitely would need to be beneficial, or you wouldn't do it.
One, I recall.
Well,
In the Tennessee experience, a crucial factor was confidentiality. So the data that would be relevant to a teacher aren't public. They're a part of the personnel process, so then it can be viewed in a more constructive way rather than a punitive way. You can learn from it, hopefully. That would be a crucial element in anything we'd have to put together, it seemed to me.
okay. I believe that we need to take some action, however.
Well, I move to adopt the MOU.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Dr. Sarvis, did you want to add something?
I assume then that you would have us send in a signed MOU for both the elementary and the secondary district, and that on page 5, you would need to designate the voluntary elements. There are 6 voluntary elements, one of which, one or more, would need to be indicated. Do I have the wrong page?
It's page
No,
5 of
it's
15, you're right.
it's page
Okay.
5 of attachment 2.
Good.
Page 5 of 6, did you say?
Page 5 of.
5 of 15.
Back, yes. And the first element in science, technology, engineering, math is an element that we're already pretty well into. I mean, we're developing that kind of a model as an academy at one of the schools. We're working with the university. We're even looking for some innovation money to help move that along. We've talked to the Gates Foundation about moving that along. We've started to work with the junior highs on pathways so that we can put something like that in place. The second one, exploring innovative uses of technology to improve learning, especially focused on all types of differentiated instruction, is something that we are certainly not very far along on. You know, everyone uses technology a little bit. I don't think we're at the forefront of this. It's something that we would like to be at the forefront of, although I would ask us to take on those that we really think we can accomplish and do a darn good job of.
And I just wanted to add that
Deacon,
the special
sorry.
education stakeholders group has talked an awful lot about assistive technology for special ed
Yeah.
students, so I think that would feed right
Yes.
into this.
The third one,
No, I was just going to say that, especially in the elementary district with the Measure I money that came in, there's been a massive investment in technology this past year. And I think that is one of the core things that they're looking at is how do we use it within a classroom to help with differentiation.
for especially differentiation. The third area is something that we have been focused on for a long time, and we saw huge gains this last year among our English learners. And it's something we need to continue to build on because well, we're getting double the increase that we're getting with our top subgroup among our English learners. They've got a long ways to go, and it's something we need to continue to work on. The others on early childhood education, after-school programs, multiple pathways, are all things that we're working in these areas. We could improve in any of these areas. I guess my suggestion would be that we mark one or two. We not mark all of them, because we're really not staffed to take on all of them. And if I were to identify the one area that I think is closest to board focus goals, it's really that third one on English learners. Of course, it's a board decision, and it's not mine.
Well, I would be inclined to agree that we should try to limit the number that we commit to.
The
And-
requirement is simply to mark one area which indicates to the state our interest in this. It has nothing to do with the acceptance of the MOU or the rejection of the MOU. It's not on a point basis.
Okay,
Mrs. Cordero?
yes.
I
Ms.
would
Parker.
suggest that we also include the first one on STEM, simply because if we're already far along in that, it may help you as you're going to the Gates Foundation, for example, to say, this is really a priority for us, and this is an area that we signed off on the MOU for the Race to the Top funding.
So when you say also, are you
I'm
suggesting
saying,
another one?
I'm suggesting that as Dr. Sarver said, that we put a yes on English learners.
Okay. So it would be yes on the first one and the third one. Is that correct?
That, for me, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And is that part of your motion then?
yes, and
Yes, okay.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay.
Other questions or comments?
I was just going to say that would have been my top choice, the STEM one, right after English learners too. So I think I'm definitely on board with that.
Okay. Okay, well then we will, with no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? I'm saying no. Okay, so it passes 3-1.
Based on that vote, we will get your signature before you leave, and we will have these in the mail tomorrow to the state.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our agenda. So hearing no objections, we'll adjourn the meeting at 5:05.
Board, thanks so much for meeting on such short notice.